Hello everyone. I've downloaded and extracted the starter files that come with this video, and I'm just going to go over here in Sublime Text and I'm going to open up that folder. It doesn't really matter where you put this folder. I put it on my desktop. Here it is. Okay, so we'll get this out of the way, this other window. Just move that over here and we'll get situated. Alright, first let's take a look at the files that we have in this project here. So we've got a web page, index.html. Let me just make this a little bit bigger here. Get a little situated here. This is our home page. Now we've also got two other folders. One is JS, that's for JavaScript. And if I look in here, I can see that there is a JavaScript file in here. It's main.js. And let's have a look at there. I'll double click on that, and you can see it's just got our window load event handler set up, and eventually we'll put some JavaScript code inside of here. So this is where all of our JavaScript code is going to go. And then make sure you notice this here on line 7 of the index.html page, we are linking to that JS file right there. On lines 5 and 6 of the HTML, there's two link tags. One is linking to this reset.css file, and that file is right over here in the CSS folder. Oh, by the way, in this project is putting all the style sheets inside of a CSS folder. I think on our final project we called it styles. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Some web developers use CSS, some use style or styles, but the idea is the same. You put all your CSS files in their own folder. And you can see here in the HTML that we're actually linking to two CSS files. The first one is the reset.css file, and remember that one just has a lot of CSS rules that kind of normalize or even out the differences between the way the browsers have their default CSS set. So that's just good practice, is to try and even out all the differences with a reset file. And then our main CSS right here on this line is going to be where we're going to put all of our CSS code. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, once we've covered all the files and folders in this little project, we're going to take a look at the HTML markup right inside of here. So we've got the head tag, and went through the link tags and the script tags that were inside of there. And then I've got the body tag, and here's the header tag. Now I'm using semantic tags in this web page, just like what we did for your final project. So remember, these are just block level tags. You can think of them as divs, but what they do is they help the search engines kind of determine what each section of the page is holding. So we've got a header tag, and then we've got a nav tag, and that's usually where the navigation goes. And then I've also got a div here with an ID called content. So this div right here on line 20 is going to end up containing two columns inside of it. The column on the left is going to be the main column, and here's another semantic tag. It's the main tag. Again, just think of it as a block level tag like a div tag, but it helps the browsers figure out that the main content of the page is inside of this tag here. And then I'm going to scroll on down. Here is the end of the main tag, and right next to the main tag, a sibling of the main tag, is an aside tag. So the aside tag is for your sidebar. So we're gonna set this up as a 2-column layout, where we're gonna have main on one side and the aside tag on the right hand side actually. So, and then now here's the end of our content div. If I scroll on up here, we'll see. So here's the div that's holding the main tag and the aside tag. And anyways, after that div comes our footer right here. And the footer should have your copyright symbol and maybe a few links in there as well. And then finally, The very last tag inside the body is a div that has an ID of mobile nav button. This will come into play later, but it's going to be hidden initially, so we won't see it, but we'll use it for small screen devices eventually. Okay, what else here? One last thing before we get started, let's take a look at what I've got in the main style sheet right now. So we'll open this up. Now, what I did here is I put some selectors and some rule sets in here already. I just set the font size on the body tag to 14 pixels, so that kind of sets the default font size for the whole page because everything is inside the body tag. And then I set some styles for H1 tags and H3 tags here, and style for the paragraph tags. I set the line height to 20 pixels just to give my lines a little bit of spacing, and then I put a margin bottom after each paragraph just to give my paragraphs a little bit of spacing too. Okay, so I kind of just set some some default styles for this page right here on lines 2 through 5. And then now here, this goes back to that div that I showed you that was at the bottom of the page. These are some CSS rules being applied to it. Let's not worry about this right now. We'll see this in a later part of the video, or maybe a separate video. But for now, just note that the display property is set to none, so we won't see it anywhere right now. We'll change this later, and we'll see how we're going to use it later. Okay, now I'm going back to the HTML file. I'm going to open this up in the browser. We'll have a look at it here. Now, not much to look at. All of the tags are in place, but without the CSS code completed, it's pretty hard to read, and not a very good website. But we'll see it drastically change as we start adding some of the CSS rules to it. And let's get started doing that right now. So I'm going to go back to my main CSS file, and we'll start adding stuff. So what we'll do here, there is another thing here in the CSS file, and we'll get to this later. This should be at the bottom of the CSS file, but we'll use media queries in this eventually, but maybe not in this video, but in a later video I'll explain what's going on here. For now, you can start adding all of the CSS rules after line 22. So that's where we'll begin. So I'll put my cursor there, actually on line 23, and we'll get started. So I'm going to move pretty quickly here. If you need to pause the video to type some of this code in, that's fine. I'm just going to be pasting the code in. It's going to be a lot faster than having you watch me type. But anyways, here's going to be the first rule set that we're going to add, and it's going to apply to the header tags. So that's that banner across the top of the page. Whoops. Set the indentation right here, so you can see we're just setting a height of 80 pixels and a background color of red. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to save it, bounce over to the browser here. Whoops, where's my browser? Here's my browser. We'll do a refresh, and you can see that it's 80 pixels high with a background color of red. Alright, the next rule set is going to be targeting H1 tags that are inside the header tag. So it's going to look like this. Let me fix my formatting here. And you can just see we're just setting the color to white for the H1 tag that's inside of the header tag. If you want to see what that looks like, bounce over to the browser, and you'll see that when we refresh. Oops, did I not save it? I didn't save it. Save the CSS file. There we go. There's our H1 tag is now white. Alright. The next thing we're going to do is clean up our navigation here. So here are the 3 links in our navigation right now, and these are actually list items. So there's this is actually a list of links right here, and normally that's what you want your navigation bar to look like, but the default display for LI tags is to be block level, which is why they're stacking vertically. We'll change that in a minute here. But anyways, all of these links are inside the nav tag, and I gave the nav tag an ID of main nav, and I did this because, let me show you that here. Whoops. So here's the HTML file, and here's the nav tag, and I gave it an ID. Now I did this because sometimes a website might have more than one nav tag. It's not all that unusual to see websites have like a primary nav bar and a secondary nav bar. So what I did here is I gave an ID to this nav tag just in case we were going to have another navigation bar. Anyway, I'm going to go back over to the style sheet here, and here's the rule that I want you to add, or the rule set I should say. So we're targeting that the ID of main nav here, setting the height to 30 pixels and the background color to orange. So go ahead and save that. Go back over to the browser and refresh, and there you can see that we've got that orange bar going across the top, but our list is spilling over it. We'll fix that in just a second here. So back in the CSS, I'm going to add this rule set here. Not much going on here. I'm just setting the margin and padding for UL tags to 0. UL tags that are nested inside of this div, the div with this ID. Okay, I'm not even going to look at that right now, but that's just to kind of get rid of some of the default padding that we might see. I'm not even sure if we actually need this, but anyways, I've got it here. You might as well type it in. What's next here? Alright, so here's the next rule I want you to add. Whoops, hitting the wrong keys here. Here we go, paste this in. So now look at this selector. We are targeting LI tags that are nested inside of UL tags that are nested inside of this the tag with this ID here. So we're setting the height to 100%. That just means that each LI tag is going to stretch to be 100% the height of its parent. So remember, the main nav is 30 pixels. So that means that by setting this to 100%, each LI tag is going to be 30 pixels high. Okay, we'll set the list style equal to none. That'll get rid of the bullets. We don't want to see the bullets there. And we'll set the display property to inline block. And what will this do is this will force those LI tags to stack horizontally. But by leaving it inline dash block instead of just inline, we'll also be able to add a height and width to these LI tags if we wanted to. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and save this. Check it out in the browser here, and we'll see what happens to our. Now you can see that our navigation is stacking horizontally. Okay, and what's next here? So back here in our style sheet, I'm going to go ahead and add another rule set here. We'll take a look at this one. Fix the formatting here. Whoops, what did I do? There we go, that's how it should look. Okay, so here this selector, look at this one. This one's drilling down to target A tags that are inside of LI tags, that are inside of UL tags, that are inside of this div that has this ID right here. So these are the A tags that are going to be just inside the LI tags in the nav. Now they are normally inline tags, but we're going to make them block level here, so they'll stretch out to the full width of their parent. And because they're block level, we can set a height, and we'll set those to 30 pixels too. That's the height of our nav bar. I set the line height to 30 pixels as well, and this will have the effect of centering the text vertically. So that's a little trick that I think we may or may not have talked about, but if you set the line height to be the same height as the tag that you're working with, then the text inside of it will be centered vertically. If it is, that works fine if you're not wrapping your text. If your text wraps, then things get out of whack. But that's a good little trick to center things vertically, is just set the line height to be the same height as the tag that you're working with. We'll set the font color to be white here, and then we'll set some padding. We'll have no padding on the top, but we'll have 20 pixels of padding on the sides for each of these A tags. So let's see what this is going to look like here. I'll go ahead and save it. Bounce back over to the browser here, hit refresh, and now you can see my links are centered within the height of the nav bar. We got some padding now that I applied, and then the color is white. Okay, one more thing to do with our nav bar before we move on. We'll give it a rollover effect here. So I'll go ahead and paste this rule in here. So now this is a pseudo selector. Whoops. There, that's how it should look here. So we're targeting those A tags again, but this selector is targeting ones that are being hovered on. So that's a pseudo selector, and you can tell by the colon there. And then so what we're going to do is make the rollover, change the background color when we roll over these to pink. So I'll go ahead and save this, go back over to the browser, hit refresh, and now when I roll over you can see the background color is pink. Okay, so we're done with the nav bar for now. Now what we're going to do is, now remember, it's kind of hard to tell from looking at this now, but all this right here is in the main tag, and all this below it here is in the aside tag. Now both the main tag and the aside tag are tucked, they're children of a div that I gave an ID of content. Okay, so the idea there was that would be the div that has all the content for the page, meaning the main content and the sidebar content. So anyways, if you look at the HTML, you'll see that the main tag and the aside tag have a parent. It's a div with an ID of content, and here it is right here. So it's got two children, the main tag, and then if I scroll down here, here's the end of the main tag, and the main tag has a sibling called the aside tag. So those are going to be the two columns, the main column and the side column. Okay, we'll eventually set that up, but for now, what we're gonna float these two elements, the main and the aside tag, and remember that you can run into some side effects if you use floating, and there's a trick to prevent that collapse floating problem. If you set the parent container, in this case that's this guy, we're going to set the parent container to have an overflow of auto, and that should help us with the collapse div problem that I showed you last week in class. So we'll do that now. Go back over to the style sheet and we'll add this rule here, fix the formatting. There we go, should look like this. Now I've got a comment here, you don't have to worry about that. We'll come back to this later. So like I said, we're going to set the overflow to auto on this, and that will help us with our side effects that we get from floating the children of this tag right here. And I'll explain this later. We may or may not use this, but go ahead and set the position to relative too. We might do some absolute positioning inside of this tag. And remember, if you do want to absolute position something, you need to set the parent to a position of relative to be able to do that. So anyways, we may come across this later. The important thing for now is to get the overflow set to auto here, and I'll go ahead and save that. We won't see any changes, so I'm not even going to look at it right now. So as I said, we are going to float the main tag and the aside tag. So here you go. Go ahead and add this to the style rule set to, should look like this, to the main tag. So we're going to float it. Let's float it to the left, and then we're going to set the width to 70%. Okay, so what we'll do now, so we're going to go ahead and float that sidebar to the aside tag. We'll float that to the left, so add this rule set here. We're going to set the background color to orange here, and then this is going to have a width of 30%. So let's see what happens now. If I save this, now that we've added these two rule sets here to make the two column layout. So I'll save this. We'll go back over to the browser here and hit refresh, and now you can see that I've got a two column layout. It's a little bit hard to see what's going on here. We'll clean this up in a little bit, but here's our main tag, and it's floated left 70% width, and here's our sidebar here, the aside tag I should say, that's got a width of 30%. And let me just show you, since we're using percent widths here, if I resize my screen, and you can see that no matter what the screen size is, my sidebar and my main tag are always going to be 70% and 30%. So that gives us that fluid layout right here. Now if you look here, we need some margin inside these two, the main tag and the aside tag. They're just pressed too close to the edges. Now I told you this can be tricky because we know about how the CSS box model works, and we're already using 100% of our width, so if I add any padding or margin to either of these, then I'm going to be going over that 100%. So the trick to doing this is you can put divs just inside these guys. So I'll show you in the markup here, the HTML that is. We'll go on over to the index.html page. Now you can see just inside the main tag, I've got a div that I gave it this class here of content frame. Okay, so everything inside the main tag is actually nested inside this div right here. So if I scroll on down, here's the closing tag for that, and then here's the end of the main tag. And you can see also here I put a div with the same class just inside of the aside tag too. So here we're safe to put padding or margin or border or whatever, and it won't blow up our layout. So this is a trick that we had mentioned last week, and so anyways, I've got these two divs here with the class of content frame, and I'm going to apply some either margin or padding to these. So let's go back over to our style sheet here, and go ahead and paste this in. So there you go, we're targeting that class, and we're giving its padding of 20 pixels all the way around, and then I also put a border in there too. I don't know if we might want to get rid of that later, but go ahead and put that in there for now. The padding 20 pixels and then the border 1 pixel solid red. We'll save that, go back over to the web page, and you can see there'll be a drastic difference here when I refresh. So there's quite a bit more breathing room inside of these two layout sections, inside of the main and the aside tags. Okay, so there's a good trick to keep the box model from getting out of hand on you. Alright, next we're going to target the footer down here. So the footer contains, you should have your copyright symbol here, and there's usually some other links here, maybe like your phone number or your address or something like that, a link to your contact page maybe. But anyways, the text is usually smaller in the footer. I'm going to go ahead and go back over to the style sheet here, and we'll add a rule set that targets the footer. So go ahead and add this code to your style sheet. We'll set the height to 28 pixels. We'll use a smaller font size, and then I set the background color to red and the font color to white here. So if we save that, go back over the page and hit refresh. Now there's our footer right here. Okay, so it looks better than it did when we started, but it still needs quite a bit of work yet. So alright, what I want to talk about now are media queries. And now unfortunately your book doesn't talk about media queries, but they're really important nowadays to make your websites look good for any size screen that that's being used to look at your website. So anyways, I can never remember the rules for these, but what this means right here is that if the width of the screen is less than 800 pixels, then the rules that are in between these curly braces are going to override any conflicting rules that we've written above here. So I'll show you how this works here. This is called a media query, and it has a breakpoint of 800 pixels. So we say that 800 pixels is the breakpoint. That's when we want these rules to kick in. And what that means is these rules will kick in, and some of them will overwrite the ones that we previously written when the screen that's viewing our page is 800 pixels or less. And that this kind of seems like goofy. You wouldn't really, it's not all that intuitive, but anyways, that's that's how you set up this media query, and I'll show you what you can do with it here. So the first thing I'm going to do is, since small screens don't have a lot of vertical or horizontal real estate, so to kind of help with the vertical real estate, I'm going to make the banner smaller. So go ahead and put this, now all of these rules are going to be indented to show that they're clearly inside of these curly braces for the media query here. So now what this is saying here is, remember up above, I can't remember what we set the header height to, but it was something like 60 or 80 pixels maybe. But what we're saying here is if the screen size is 800 pixels or less, that means that we want the height of that header to be 44 pixels instead. And let me show you what this does here. I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll go back over to the browser here, and now if I refresh, you won't see a difference, but I'll go ahead and refresh, but you will see a difference when I shrink the screen down. Once we, now keep a close watch on this red area here, because as I shrink the screen down, once we hit 800 pixels or less, then we'll see the height change. So right, where is it? There we go. Right there, you can see if I make the screen just less than 800 pixels, then our banner becomes 44 pixels tall instead of what we originally set it to. So that's how these media queries work here. When the screen size is 800 pixels or less, and I could choose anything, but 800 pixels seems to be a good breakpoint area, then these rules will kick in, and they will override ones that we've set up above. Okay. Now here's the next rule set that I want you to add inside of this media query here. We'll go ahead and type this in. So here we're targeting the main tag and the aside tag. Now remember, we floated those to the left to get them to stack horizontally, and we set the widths to 70 and 30%. But now on small screens, we actually don't have room for both columns to appear. So what we'll do is we'll set these back to the original. We'll take away the float, so this will just remove the float that we did up above, and we'll have to set the width back to 100%. Now that's the normal width of a block level element, but remember up above we set the main to 70% and the aside to 30%. Well, now we're setting them both back to 100%. Okay, now this position static, this is not required at this time, but I put this here for a problem that we might run into later. Go ahead and type it in, even though it's actually not being used here. The important part of this is to note that we're getting rid of the floats for our two column layout for main tag and aside, and we're setting the widths back to 100%. Okay, so let's see what happens here. We'll save this, go back over to the browser. Now I'll hit refresh here, and you can see at these smaller screen sizes it pops back into a one column layout where the main tag is here with the white background, and here's our aside tag with the orange background. But notice what happens if I stretch the screen out so it's bigger than 800 pixels, then it'll go back to the floats and the 70% and the 30% width. So here's my breakpoint. You can see it. You can see the layout changing because of this media query. That all the rules that we have inside of. Whoops, what am I doing here? Okay. Anyways. Okay. So if you look now, we're not too pressed for space now with our navbar, but if we had links going all the way across here, you could see how when the screen sizes get too small, we run out of real estate for our navbar. So now this is something common that I'm sure you've all seen before, but a lot of times on phone screens they'll make the nav bar disappear, so we won't even see it at all, but what we will see is like a menu icon like this one right up here. Some people call these the hamburger icon, or the menu icon. It's kind of universally accepted that, or kind of universally recognized that this icon represents that a menu will appear when you press on it, and that's how we're going to set this up. So again, we don't necessarily have to do this because our three links in the navbar aren't taking up too much space across the screen, but if we add more links here, we're going to run into problems, because if we had like 3 or 4 more links, then as the screen sizes get to be smaller and smaller, we run out of the real estate to show those. So what we'll do here is I'm going to go back over to the CSS, and I'm going to actually add 2 rule sets right here. So so these are the 2 rule sets I'm adding. One to target the main nav, so we're gonna make it disappear by setting its display to none. We'll make the nav bar disappear. Now remember, up above I had set the height to be 30 pixels high. I think I want to reverse that and set it back to auto here, and that's the default setting, is that your tags will stretch out and the height will automatically be determined depending on the content. So this is height equals auto. That's the default setting. Up above we set it to 30 pixels, and now I just want to reverse that. and again we're going to make it disappear on these small screens. Now the other thing is what we want to do with the LI tags that are in the nav is make those go back to being block level tags, so that they're gonna the links in here are actually gonna stack vertically again. So, and I'll explain why I did this in a second. But go ahead and add these two rule sets here, and then we'll see what happens when I refresh the page here. So. Okay, so the nav bar will disappear, and that's what we want. So, oh, did I not save? I didn't save it. Let me go ahead and save it. And there we go. Now we basically just made the nav bar disappear. We can't see the LI tags, but those are going to go back to stacking vertically, and I'll show you why I'm setting their display back to block in a moment here. Now remember that div tag that I showed you that was at in the very bottom of the body tag? This one right here. So underneath the footer I've got this div tag which we set to display equals none. Okay, so it's been invisible all along here, so we haven't seen it. But what we want to do is this is going to be have our hamburger menu icon in it, and it's actually an entity reference. And if you want to get those three stripes, that little icon, this is what you can put for your content inside this div here. But this is going to be our menu button. So what I'll do here is now by default on the bigger screens it's hidden. We set the display equal to none, so we haven't seen it yet. But in that media query, I'm going to go ahead and add this rule set here. And that will turn its display from none to block, so we'll see it now. So here's what's going to happen when I go back and refresh the page here. So the nav bar is gone, but now when I refresh, you can see here's our little menu icon. So now this is going to disappear when the screen size is bigger than 800 pixels. We're only going to see this when we're at 800 pixels or less. So now what should happen here, if I stretch the screen out here, we'll see that this button will disappear and our nav will reappear. Okay, so there we go. The nav bar appears, but our menu button disappears. Now at the smaller screen sizes, 800 pixels or less in width, the nav disappears, and then we've got this button here. So what we're going to do here is set up this button so that it's going to make the navigation appear. So we'll use some JavaScript to do that. Alright, so let's go over to our main.js file. That's where all of our JavaScript is going to be. So here, underneath the comment here, I'm just going to put some white space around, in between. This is the code I want you to put in here. I need to fix the formatting here. It should not look like this. It should look like, whoops, there. That's how it should be formatted. Alright, anyways, I think what I'll do is I'll just give you this code so you don't have to try and type everything here. But let's just take a look at this. So what this basically does is we're going to get a handle on the navigation, and that's our nav tag that has an ID of main nav here, so we're going to get a handle on that. And now here's something that I think I showed you, but you can figure out the calculated style settings for an object by using this method. Now this is a method of the window object called getComputedStyle, and then whatever you pass in, whatever element you pass in, it will return the style settings for that element. So we're getting the style settings for our main nav. So now what we're doing here is once we get the style settings, we can actually get the display setting. So that's what we're after here, is we want to find out if the main nav has its display set to none or block. And basically we're going to toggle it. So that means that if the display is set to none, then we're going to set it to block. If the display is not set to none, then we're going to set it to none. Okay? So that's everything that's going on right here. We can talk about this more in class, but let's see what this does here. I'll go ahead and save this. And oh, by the way, very important, you know what? This is not formatted properly. It should be formatted like this. There, that's how it should be formatted. Sorry about that. Anyways, all this code right here that I was just talking about is running as an event handler for when that hamburger menu button gets clicked. So here's the button right here. We're pulling that out of the DOM, and then we're adding a click event handler function to it. And so basically the code that runs when that button gets clicked is we're basically going to toggle the display setting of our navigation. Okay, so once we save this and go back over to the page here, and I'll hit refresh. So now remember, the nav bar is hidden, but once I press this button, it's going to toggle it to be display equals block. So there we go. So now I can see the nav bar up here. Okay, so now on the smaller screens, if I hit the menu button, the navigation menu appears, and if I hit it again, it will disappear. Okay, that's it. This is how you're going to set up your own website. So you can refer back to this video when you're working on your website. All right, thanks a lot. Have a good one.